Welcome back in. It's the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, and we are fresh off confirmation that Penn State has found its new running backs coach. It is Stan Drayton, a veteran of the industry, highly respected, highly regarded for what he has done with running back rooms across America. He also has experience in the NFL back in 2015-16 as the Chicago Bears running backs coach. But when you go through his resume, really stands out what he has accomplished here in college football. He was the running backs coach for Urban Meyer at Ohio State in 2014 when they won a national championship. He was the running backs coach for Urban Meyer in 2006 with the Florida Gators when they won a national championship. His stops include Tennessee, Syracuse, Mississippi State. You go back to some of the more humbling beginnings of his coaching career. He was Villanova's running backs coach when a young man named Brian Westbrook became a multi-time All-American there with the Wildcats, ultimately a draft pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. And he proved to be one of the better running backs and playmakers the Eagles had in franchise history. So a lot to look through here, and we'll get to some of those names that he has coached beyond Brian Westbrook. There are some big-time names that you know from the college football sector and from the NFL world. Of course, we mentioned Stan Drayton on our episode Tuesday when we were coming out of James Franklin's press conference. They had not yet filled this position, obviously. We learned this would be the selection and this would be the match on Friday morning. But Stan Drayton was the name we brought up on the podcast. It was the name that was on our initial names to know board for this position. And as we discussed then, Temple's head coach, 3 past years, an opportunity for him to run his own program, ultimately did not work out so well. He was fired last November. He was looking for an opportunity. Penn State had an opportunity with Jaywan Slider leaving, and it seems like a really strong marriage. We're going to talk about this move and some of the ramifications on the recruiting trail as well with Tyler Calvaruso, who joins us right now on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Tyler, it's big news, and it feels like for the second consecutive time here the winter, James Franklin is forced to counter a move by someone else. Last time it was Clemson coming and taking Tom Allen, your defensive coordinator. This time around, Notre Dame has a very, very big-time offer on the table to get Jaywan Slider out of campus. And then what do? Well, you go out and get Jim Knowles from Ohio State, who many believe could be the top defensive mind in college football. Give him $3+ million per year to coach your defense. And then now it's Stan Drayton, who I think we all would agree, you put together a bunch of names early in the week, some up-and-comers on that list, some highly established guys, some with connections to the coaching staff. But Stan Drayton stood out. And now it's 2 for 2, Tyler, where it feels like James Franklin hires the number one guy on that wish list. And this is where you are as a Penn State and Nittany Lions fan here in this 2025 era, the LTFI era. It's a good place to be right now.
Yeah, I mean, James Franklin talked about wanting a return right off the bat on this hire. Not a guy who, he would really settle into the job in 2026 and hit the ground running from that point on. He wanted someone who could come in and immediately make an impact. And I don't think there's a better hire than Stan Drayton in that regard. His track record speaks for itself. The guys he has coached and the guys he has developed, what he's done with those players speaks for itself. He has gotten countless high-level running backs to the NFL, and he didn't just get them there. He put them in a position to have long, successful NFL careers. Carlos Hyde, Ezekiel Elliott, Bijan Robinson, now the latest with the Falcons. The list goes on. And you want a guy like that as part of your staff when you bring back a pair of 1,000-yard rushers, veteran 1,000-yard rushers at that, who have their sights set on playing in the NFL next year. Guys who want to wrap up their Penn State career with a bang, but also want to develop and be in the best position to succeed in the NFL. So Drayton checks both of those boxes when it comes to the current state of your running back room. And from a recruiting standpoint, I think that's going to be it for Penn State as well. So when you look at the names we compiled earlier this week, which you did a great job of, Drayton immediately stood out in a couple different ways. And if you're a Penn State fan, you got to be thrilled with this hire. I think it's the best direction Penn State could have gone with this one, or replace Jaywan Slider.
Yeah, and look, this is the name that we were talking about early in the week, and as we got into Thursday evening, it was becoming more and more clear that this was a situation where Penn State and Drayton were starting to work their way toward the finish line. There was some reporting Thursday afternoon from Football Scoop that he was indeed Penn State's top target. We put out a few messages at Lions 24/7 on Thursday night. By the time I woke up Friday around 6:30 in the morning, reviewing some of that, I went and posted something on our message board that things were looking very promising for Penn State in this regard. And something I heard from someone who is at the national level and does a lot of work in covering coach contract deals. I caught up with them briefly this morning before things were officially out there that this was going to happen, but was trending in that direction. And they said to stack the hire of Jim Knowles, which turned a lot of heads in the industry. I want to remind people that Oklahoma was viewed as the school that was supposed to be prying him away from Columbus. Everyone had the Sooners circled there. And then Notre Dame also started trying to get involved there when their defensive coordinator, Al Golden, goes to the NFL. So for Penn State to not only pull him away from the reigning national champions, but from that group of sharks circling the water, and then, as he told me, to stack that with this move of Drayton, when you've got Texas coaching job opening up, their running back position. He was at Texas for 5 seasons, had a lot of history down there. He's a very, very marketable candidate right now. And so for Penn State to be the team that comes away with both these guys, they said the message it has sent to the college football world is, quote, Penn State is not taking a back seat to anyone in 2025. And Tyler, right or wrong, there has been kind of a perception where whether it's on the field against the Ohio State Buckeyes, Penn State's taking a back seat. If it's on the recruiting trail against an Ohio State or an Alabama, Penn State's probably taking a back seat. If it's trying to go for the same coaching staff against a program like Ohio State, it felt like Penn State was often in that back seat. Now they're at least riding shotgun and probably trying to elbow the Buckeyes away and grip that steering wheel. And I keep mentioning Ohio State because, look, they're the standard bearer right now in the Big Ten. They didn't win the Big Ten this year, but they won the national championship, and they've been the most consistent program here for the last decade and a half in this conference. And so, Tyler, when you view things in that kind of a prism, because perspective does matter, wins and losses are what's going to ultimately determine James Franklin's history and how he's viewed here. But perception matters between the months of February and August. And where is Penn State right now, in your opinion, compared to where they have in recent seasons?
Well, first things first, at this point, I feel as if I would put this coaching staff up against any in the country. At this point, I don't think that's a statement made through blue and white colored glasses either, because just look at the quality of coordinator that you have on board. Knowles' track record. He's coming off a national championship at Ohio State. Andy Kotelnicki, he had a lot of success in year one. Then you move on to the position coaches who have had long-term success at Penn State, guys like Anthony Poindexter, Terry Smith. Deion Barnes is working his way into that territory. I know it's still early in his career, but he's been pretty impressive since taking over as defensive line coach. Phil Jarwin has done a complete overhaul of Penn State's offensive line. And also take into account how many of these guys get calls from other programs every single offseason. These guys are coveted. They're wanted in other places.
We said the fact that Sider you weren't on the podcast with us Tuesday, but Daniel and I were both trying to lay home the case that Jaywan Sider wasn't supposed to last 7 seasons at Penn State on paper. On the surface, he's supposed to get an offer, jump at it, and leave here. He's not from the region. He was never supposed to be here 7 seasons, which makes that longevity really notable as we kind of close the chapter there.
You could argue it's surprising he's not a head coach at a school in Florida at this point. That's how good of a coach he was throughout his tenure at Penn State, and that's how valuable he was for Penn State throughout. So I'm going to mention that in that conversation. Well, Ty Howell, who has done a hell of a job with the tight ends. That is undeniable at this point. So I'd put the staff up against really any other in the nation. At this point, you said it earlier after the hire, it's another all-in move for Penn State. They are going all in on this 2025 season, as they should. James Franklin is locked in on doing every single thing he can to make this 2025 season a special season for Penn State. He has the personnel in place. He has the staff in place. He has a staff, especially from a recruiting standpoint, with a ton of juice. You could build another one of those 2022 S classes in this 2026 cycle, I believe. So I think on all fronts right now, again, it's February. We got to see how spring ball plays out. Got to see how fall camp plays out. But Penn State's headed in the right direction in this 2025 season for sure.
I think obviously you're wondering, well, how do Katron Allen and Nick Singleton feel about their new coach? I think the impression I get out of Penn State facilities after some conversation is they really expect these guys to be all in on this move as they wrap their head around what Stan Drayton has accomplished in his career. You mentioned some of those names that he's coached, Ezekiel Elliott and Carlos Hyde at Ohio State, both big-time playmakers in their own regard. both significant NFL experiences as well. Bijan Robinson, a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. He was brought into that Texas Longhorns program and initially developed by Stan Drayton. Jarius Norwood, maybe not as notable of a name for people right now because they think he's probably about 40 years old, but earlier in Stan Drayton's career, Norwood was a two-time All-SEC running back at Mississippi State. Before Dak Prescott was the guy that everyone knew for the Bulldogs, Norwood was kind of that guy, and he got a chance to play quite a bit of NFL football as well. I already mentioned Brian Westbrook, All-American at the lower level with Villanova, but he belonged at the higher level, I think, and he's somebody that was brought to campus in Philadelphia by Stan Drayton. So Stan Drayton had the eye for that talent, made sure he got him in the program, produced an All-American, and then we know if you're an Eagles fan out there, you were rarely well aware of what Brian Westbrook was able to do at the professional level, kind of an underdog story for him. And so you now set the stage to have Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton. They are, again, duplicate seasons from 2024. Statistically, put them right there to be number 1 and number 2 all time in Penn State history. And so I think you feel really good about selling the vision, matching them up with Stan Drayton and seeing, look, this is a 1-year partnership for you, for those two in particular. And this is why, look at the history here. It's all there for you. I don't think there's much to sell. Now, what you want to make sure you've got those younger components on board because the carrot isn't as near to their nose, right? They've got a little bit more ways to be able to go and jump on that carrot and claim a starting job and be big-time players for Penn State. We'll see how they work in Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, Cam Wallace when he's healthy. Tyke Hayes is now on campus, and Jabri Wallace-Coleman coming to campus a little bit later. But, Tyler, those are 5 players who aren't named Nick Singleton or Kaytron Allen who have ambitions of their own. They want to get to the NFL. They want to be Penn State football stars at running back. And all those 5, either sophomore or freshman status. So when you view this move and how it might be viewed by that fraction of the room, I think that's probably more important for James Franklin to make sure that he's getting those guys on the same page, understanding why Stan Drayton is the answer and getting them long-term feeling like they're Nittany Lions and this is where they can grow versus day by day trying to see if this is still a right fit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we can talk about Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton all day, but the fact of the matter is they're not the only members of the running back room. They're not the only running backs on Penn State's roster who matters. Every single running back that Penn State has on its depth chart matters. And yeah, Allen and Singleton are the focus because of what they mean for Penn State's success in 2025. But guys like Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, Tyke Hayes, they're going to be pivotal beyond the 2025 season and, maybe even in the 2025 season, depending on how things shake out. You never know what's going to happen throughout the course of the year. So it's just as important to get those guys on board with this hire as it is getting Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton on board with this hire. And, just going back to the high school recruitments, thinking about some of the talking points with guys like Martin, Smith, Hayes, Wallace-Coleman. Development was always at the forefront of the conversation. It was a big deal for all of those guys. And now you bring in Stan Drayton with this wealth of experience and track record of developing running backs who, some of these guys, they have similar skill sets. Bijan Robinson, he's not the same physical build as Quentin Martin, but look how he was used at Texas. He was a multifaceted back where they would line him up in the backfield. He'd run between tackles. And then guess what? Passing downs needed, split outside, play some wide receiver, make plays with your hands, get into space. So I think Drayton, it's a fit not just with the veterans in the room, it's a fit with the younger guys in the room too, which it's paramount.
By the way, Drayton, a little bit of roots here. He's a Cleveland native, but Allegheny College in Pennsylvania is where he played college ball. Division III, he was an All-American at that level every season. They won the 1990 national championship. So in terms of coming back to Pennsylvania, feeling some familiarity here, keep that in mind. And in terms of familiarity, I mentioned this in an article that we wrote today, breaking about the story. But Phil Trautwein has a long-term connection here. Penn State's offensive line coach. He was a starting tackle for Florida's offensive line back in 2006 when they won that national championship. Stan Drayton was the running backs coach, and now all those years later, almost 20 years later, they'll be sharing a facility, working as colleagues with, as you said, together on one of the most impressive staffs that is assembled right now in college football. And so Penn State moves forward with Stan Drayton. We talked about the running backs they have on board right now. What about what comes next? That conversation starts with Messiah Mickens. He caught up with Brian Doan, who is a 24/7 Sports national recruiting analyst. You've seen his coverage all across our network. Mickens told him that it is open season now for official visits. He planned to take several of them. He mentioned Notre Dame, and he leaned on how he had such a strong rapport with J1 Sider and how that was a key part of his commitment to Penn State. He did not back off his commitment to Penn State, but the top 24/7 running back at Harrisburg High School did say he plans to go very exploratory with his recruitment process moving forward, Tyler. Since then, of course, Stan Drayton has been announced not by Penn State, but by everybody else as the next running backs coach of the Nittany Lions. You have spoken with Mickens with that fresh perspective. Has that changed anything? What are you hearing?
Mickens has already gotten the chance to catch up with Stan Drayton. Those two actually spoke on Thursday night before the news of this hire went public. So those two are already getting a head start on the relationship building front. And Drayton's message to Mickens was clear. I want to develop you. I want to make you one of the best backs in the country when it's all said and done. And Mickens overall was excited about the hire. I think he's been very much in wait and see mode since Sider departed for Notre Dame. Those two are really, really close. So, that brings about some uncertainty. It brings about some uncertainty for Keemont Spell as well in the 2027 class. So now that a hire is in place, you look to the future. You look more towards, hey, what's next for me in my development at Penn State now that I know who the hire is and who is going to be the running backs coach moving forward. And when it comes to Mickens, I think Drayton made a strong first impression. I think the feedback from Mickens is positive. Now, will he make other visits? It wouldn't surprise me, as, it's been alluded to on the Lions 24/7 board. Brian Dolan did a great job catching up with Messiah Mickens on Thursday night to discuss a little bit of that. He committed early in his recruitment. He didn't get to go through a lot of the things other recruits get to go through in their process. He didn't make a ton of visits elsewhere. And if he did pop up elsewhere, really 7-on-7 related stuff. So, if he pops up elsewhere, circles back with a guy like Sider at Notre Dame, check out South Bend, which was a place he's already been, it wouldn't surprise me. But I think so far so good in terms of reception on this hire from Penn State's running backs commits, especially Mickens, since he is in the immediate. He's the lone back in Penn State's 26 class right now. And we're looking to see moving forward in coming weeks and months as spring ball starts, not only how this impacts the board overall, because now Stan Drayton is going to have to sit down and decide, who's the second back that he wants to pair with Mickens in this class. It's about keeping Mickens as well. And I think Penn State, right now it's still early. Again, he just got hired, but they're off to a good start with that.
Yeah, I think along with Notre Dame, and I would certainly expect that J1 Sider is going to have some pull with these guys moving forward, maybe to get them to South Bend for a visit. But North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, among some of the other schools that Mickens mentioned as being in that mix as he navigates things. Come on, Spell, another in-state running back. He's in the 2027 class. This was a really early commitment for Penn State, but a notable one because we have him as the number 3 running back nationally early on in that 2027 class. So we're talking about guys who are going to be juniors on the field this upcoming fall. He's number 56 overall in our rankings for that class nationally. So look, this is a dude who's got plenty of cachet on the recruiting trail already. He doesn't have a lot to prove, which is saying something halfway through high school. He can command a lot of offers right now. He can command a lot of phone calls from a lot of running back coaches out there. So what is the vibe you're getting on Kamon Spell, his willingness to maybe keep things low-key, stick with the Nittany Lions, or he's one tweet away from having college football world lighten him up?
He is, but I think this is a hire. It's a multifaceted thing with Keemont Spell in the sense that Terry Smith played a big part in reeling in his initial commitment, the Western Pennsylvania connections. That was a big part of it for Spell. But, look, Sider was his position coach. He built a relationship with him, and Spell even indicated, after that move was made to Notre Dame, there was a little bit of, uncertainty. What am I going to do next? Where's my commitment at right now? But he caught up with the staff, caught up with James Franklin, and a lot of the reasons why he committed to Penn State in the first place were reinforced. So I think moving forward, he's feeling good. Will other schools call? Yeah, sure. They were probably going to continue calling whether J1 Sider was on the staff or not. He's a 2027 recruiter, top 100 one at that. Just look at Messiah Mickens' recruitment. Schools never stopped calling. He went as far as publicly shutting things down. Obviously, now the game's different with the change, but with Spell, he's even younger. So I'm sure schools will continue to call. How he receives those calls remains to be seen, but I think he's pretty good with this hire and where things are at with Penn State right now. He's looking forward to catching up with Drayton on a phone call sooner rather than later. He was telling me Franklin told him as soon as Drayton gets settled in, they're going to connect. And, that'll follow up a spring practice visit where Spell will be able to see Drayton coach in person during practice. And, those two get some FaceTime, and that's valuable.
I do wonder what this kind of meshing of the brands, the Drayton brand and the Penn State running back brand, could do for the Nittany Lions on the recruiting trail. You talk about the Saquon Barkley brand right now, stronger than it's ever been, and that was on full display throughout the week as he made the rounds post Super Bowl. And then you've got Stan Drayton, who, again, you sit him in a living room with mom and dad, or you bring a family up to campus and you get in Drayton's office. He can pull up clips, pictures. Heck, maybe he can get on his cell phone and even call a guy like an Ezekiel Elliott or a Bijan Robinson to vouch for him. But those are names that matter. They have stories that matter because they have that success at the next level. And that's ultimately what everyone desires who is in this recruiting game. So we'd be really, really curious to see. I know you'll have us covered on everything along the way. We're going to shift gears toward recruiting right now with you, Tyler. And I challenged you because we spent quite a bit of time on the last episode you joined us for, which went live last Friday, on Zion Ellie, number one edge rusher in the nation, extremely versatile defender. We saw him in camp last year. He could be the top overall prospect in America for the 2026 class out of the state of Maryland. He's committed to Maryland, and we broke down the flip factors and Penn State being a long-term buzz part of his recruitment last episode. And so it made me think, who are some of those other names that, as Penn State's aiming high and they're going all in on so many things, let's go all in on the recruiting conversation, Tyler. I say give us a six-pack of names. Take Zion Ellie off the table because we already did that one. Who are some guys that Penn State is taking big swings for? They're aiming high, and if they were to land them, they could be real cornerstones of the blue chip variety for this group moving forward. Of course, the 2026 class, it seems early, but 10 months from now, they'll be putting pen to paper is old now, but they'll be finalizing their plans. And 11 months from now, they'll be joining this team during the next playoff run potentially. So, Tyler, with that in mind, get us going with a big man from the DMV, Emmanuel Ihenacho.
Yeah, and a lot of these names you'll notice are in the Northeast. They're right in Penn State's recruiting footprint, which is a contrast from last cycle where the region was down a little bit. Not the case in 2026. That's why I said what I said earlier, where you have the potential to go out and build a 2022 S class just because of the talent that's right in your backyard. And there aren't many players better than Emmanuel Ihenacho in that regard. I got the chance to see him at Under Armour Baltimore last spring, and he's a beast. I mean, physically imposing. He's as big as any tackle prospect I've seen in person. And, Phil Troutwayne has done a good job here. Penn State's done a good job here. They're right there in that mix. But the fact of the matter is, this is a recruitment where a lot of money is being tossed around, just given the nature of what offensive linemen cost these days in the NIL era. And look, I mean, it's not that Penn State can't compete on that front. It just comes down to when you have a program like Oregon involved and some other NIL power players in the mix. Where does that leave you? Where does that – if this was pre-NIL, Penn State might be the favorite right now. But right now it looks like Oregon's the favorite. And look, I don't even think Ihenacho's a guy who's driven by NIL or anything like that. But when you have some serious figures being tossed around, they're hard to ignore, no matter who you are, no matter how you about NIL you are, or whatever your priorities are. There are certain numbers that can't be ignored. And Ihenacho is that kind of prospect. He is that high upside of a prospect. He's a potential franchise tackle. You can already see it. The way he moves, his hand placement, his strength. He's probably the best tackle prospect I've seen with my own eyes. I know I haven't been doing this as long as a lot of others in the industry, but he stands out in so many different ways. Penn State would love to have him. They're going to get an official visit, and that's going to be huge because really that's your opportunity to sell Ihenacho on every single aspect of the program. He's already been around a bunch early in his recruitment, which is good for Penn State because he comes back to Penn State with that familiarity already in place. Now, once official visit season rolls around, you're going to have the opportunity to make an impression that gets you over the finish line. It's not going to be easy, but when it comes to the names on the board in this cycle, if there's a grand slam land on this board, it's Emmanuel Ihenacho.
If it wasn't obvious from Tyler's description, Iheanacho is a 5-star prospect. He's the number 5 overall talent in our rankings for the 2026 class, and you could easily confuse him. And you're right about the way he moves to the size, because you hear these measurements and you think that guy's probably stiff right now. He's 16, 17 years old. It's not the case right there. You have mobility of the lower body here for someone who is pushing towards 6'7", 350 pounds at Georgetown Prep School in Maryland. And he's somebody that a lot of teams will be keeping tabs on. And we're going to stay on the offensive line. And why not? Because Phil Trautwein, the way they are assembling talent, we talked about it last week. There is a true case to be made that they have the deepest offensive line in college football right now. You make that statement 3, 4, 5 years ago, people are going to laugh you out of the room. But they're putting together prospects like this. Iheanacho could be one of those, and Darius Gray is another to watch. He's an interior offensive line prospect looking long-term. He's number 3 in that position group at 24/7 Sports, number 42 overall nationally, and he's out of St. Christopher School in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah, and man, we have him as a top 50 recruit. I really, really like his tape. I think he could climb even higher when it's all said and done. Penn State has some work to do here. There's some ground that needs to be made up. I mean, he hasn't been to State College coming up in exactly 1 year now, and some of that's been out of his control. He was going to be back for Junior Day on February 1st until a very unfortunate family situation popped up and he was unable to make the trip. But the fact of the matter is Penn State has to get him back. You know, he's got all his official visits scheduled already. Penn State is among that bunch, and South Carolina's done really well with Darius Gray. His recruitment is a full-on national one at this point. I remember first talking to him when he was still a regional recruit with just a few offers, Penn State being one of them. Things have really blown up for him from that point on. And it's one of those recruitments where, again, I wrote about it earlier in the week. The spring is important. We're talking so much about official visits earlier than ever at this point, but the spring is really valuable in the sense that there are certain guys you need to get back to campus. Gray is one of them because he hasn't been around in a while, and you want to build up a little bit of positive momentum heading into official visits. Me and you have always talked about spring visits as, you know, really a building block situation where you either get a guy's official visit locked in or it's a guy who has an official locked in, and you give him really something positive to think about heading into the OV. That can only help Penn State moving forward. So getting a guy like Gray back to campus during the spring would be huge because the fact of the matter is the Nittany Lions have some ground to make up. But he would be another home run get for Phil Trautwein in this class. There are a lot of high-quality names on his board, names we're not discussing in this conversation who are really good players, but these are the home run swings that Penn State is taking.
Maryland, Virginia. Let's go back to Maryland now. Kari Adams, one of the premier cornerback recruits in America. He's right on the bubble of being a 5-star 24/7 Sports, number 38 nationally, number 2 at the cornerback position. He's got that length that Terry Smith and everybody who coaches cornerbacks covets, but 6'2", 175. You can probably pretty easily draw a line between him and Joey Porter Jr. I know they've tried to do that in the past with similarly built cornerback recruits. So Kari Adams, I know he's a guy that's spoken with Brian Doan recently. I know he's coming down and trying to I guess, narrow his focus at this stage because he's got plenty of options. Where is Penn State in that process, and why is he on your list here? I mentioned the rankings, but let's go beyond that a little bit.
Yeah, I think Penn State's in the top of the top group for Adams at this point. I think Notre Dame is right there as well, and there are a lot of schools in the mix for Adams still. You know, he's narrowed down a little bit to a top 10, but when it comes to the schools truly standing out, Penn State's in that conversation, Notre Dame's in that conversation. I think Oregon's in that conversation a little bit. And yeah, they just did the Joey Porter Jr. thing with Brandon Finney last cycle. And there are a lot of similarities between Finney and Kari Adams too. I've spent some time trying to figure out which recruit I like more as a prospect, and I still can't figure it out. They're both really, really good players. Adams might be the best cornerback in the 26 class. We have him as the number 2 corner in the nation right now. When it's done, he might be the number 1 corner in the nation. For my money, I would have him at number 1. I just think he's such a good player. And elite speed, elite cover ability, the testing numbers are good. The measurables all check out in terms of length, just overall size. He has what you want out of an elite cornerback prospect. And he's been pretty open about his interest in Penn State. My conversations with him, his conversations with Doan, you know, staff's done a good job with him. Terry Smith's done a good job with him. Anthony Poindexter has been involved in this recruitment as well. Penn State has prioritized Adams really ever since it offered during the summer. That has continued hot and heavy, and that's a big reason why the Nittany Lions are in that top portion of Adams' pecking order. Now, again, getting him back in the spring, that would be nice, but at the very least, you're going to get a crack during official visit season. And it comes at a time where Penn State, that June 6th through 8th weekend, that's a time where Penn State is hosting a lot of its top targets. Adams falls right into that category.
You'll find Adams at Loyola Blakefield High School in Townsend, Maryland. And let's go back to the trenches now, over to New Jersey, Tyler, with you. And we just spoke about his brother on this podcast not too long ago, Owen Wafel, a transfer pickup for Penn State, defensive tackle. He spent his freshman year last year at Michigan. He is out of the Hun School in Princeton, New Jersey, which is where Caden Wallace, a 4-year starter at offensive tackle for Penn State, was playing at the prep level. So there's familiarity. They still have the same head coach there that they did back then. And obviously now his brother is on the roster here with the Nittany Lions. We've heard some good things athletically about what the elder Wafel has looked like so far during his time on campus. But with Luke, he's at a different level in terms of pedigree of a prospect. I know his brother ended up at Michigan, but he was a high 3-star. Luke is a 4-star. He's a top 24/7 talent right now at 6'5", 240, listed as an edge. I know he does damage there, but when he's this size with that frame, I think you could see some positional versatility moving forward with him in the trenches. Where do things stand, and how much of a wrinkle dynamic is it that his older brother is now wearing the Penn State uniform?
Oh, it definitely helps Penn State. Those two have had conversations about teaming up together at the next level. It's only a positive for Penn State. And yeah, I mean, no disrespect to Owen, but Luke is a significantly better high school prospect. I mean, he's a high-level defensive line prospect, has the athleticism. And I remember when he was coming up, early in his high school career, before he transferred to Hun, he was down at Middletown South, in my neck of the woods before, and there were a lot of people down there excited about him. And that excitement has only grown as he transferred to Hun and really coming to his own physically. He's one of those top priorities for Deion Barnes in this class. Penn State's going to get an official. I actually really like where the Nittany Lions are at this point. Even before his brother transferred to Penn State was faring really well, but even more so now, the ball's rolling in the right direction.
I wanted to go to a receiver. I challenged you. We needed to name a receiver because receiver is something that we always got to discuss when you talk about talent acquisition right now for Penn State. And we actually did not go and just throw a dart at the board of the top 10 ranked receivers in the country and say it's this guy. We went with someone that we have more familiarity with. We've seen him work for the Penn State staff. We've heard from him about those experiences. We have feedback from the Nittany Lions about how they feel about him. He's a 4-star composite. He's the #1 player in the state of New York, Messiah Hampton out of Rochester. And this is a guy I think you can do a lot of different things with, inside, outside. I think he can be a vertical threat, but I don't think it's a stretch to say he can make some tough catches. Want to see more of him on the camp circuit this spring and summer. He's a guy that I think everyone should be keeping tabs on with our rankings if he can go out and duplicate some of the stuff and build upon what we saw last year. But Messiah Hampton is where we landed here. And what do we make of the realistic nature that Penn State is one of the final hats on the table and maybe the pick at the end of the day?
It's a very realistic, I think, scenario. It's funny you mentioned, those top 10 guys in the nation. You talk to some people at Penn State, they think Hampton belongs up there. They love his skill set. They love his upside. And we've seen it with our own eyes when he's, participated in 7-on-7 at Penn State. He goes and gets that ball aggressively. He's quick off the line. He's crisp with his route running, has good hands, has a lot of the traits you want in a high school receiver going into
and he knows he's good. I know I'm just going to put it out there. There's a trait there that maybe we haven't talked about enough with some of the Penn State receiver recruits, and maybe it's been reflected in them not rising up through the practice field and into game action. He knows he's good, and he exhibits that in the way he talks, in the way he his body language out there against defensive backs. I like that he carries that quiet confidence. It maybe not so quiet confidence. You need it at this position. He has it. I think it's worth noting.
Yeah, I talked to Hampton a little bit in November about his junior season. He's tucked away in New York, really, and he's not a cocky kid by any stretch, but he's very confident in his ability, and he knows what he can do to opposing defensive backs every time that he's on the field. And yeah, he has that kind of it factor, for lack of a better term, that I think any wide receiver room could use, Penn State's especially. I wonder where Hampton would be in his recruitment if he wasn't where he is located geographically. If he was in SEC country, what would he be ranked? What would his offer sheet look like? For Penn State, it's a good thing he is where he is, because he's kind of, he's not necessarily a secret, but he's not quite the national scale you'd expect a player of his caliber to be, because he is an immensely talented kid. Penn State's right in that mix. He chose to visit Miami towards the end of the winter contact period. He was originally going to visit Penn State for that February 1st junior day. decided, go play 7-on-7 down in Miami, made it out to the Hurricanes. So they're a factor in their recruitment now. But Penn State's good.
I'm sorry. No, I was muted. My point was, when you live in Rochester, New York, South Florida sounds like a pretty good place to be in January. And no offense to those of us who live and reside in the community here in central Pennsylvania, but it is what it is that time of year.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. Can't fault him for what, especially because Hampton's a competitor. He wanted to go play 7-on-7, stop by Miami while he was down there. So it was a good trip for him. He has a good relationship with Marcus Higgins. Marcus Higgins, that was actually his final stop on the recruiting trail before the contact period wrapped. So that tells you where Hampton is on the board.
Let's finish with our board here. Again, like I said, a 6-pack of top targets, and we're going to wrap up in the state of Pennsylvania with one of the premier athletes, a guy that can do a lot for you on the football field, the high school level. I'm very curious to see exactly how Penn State's staff would craft a role for him during the 3-4 years he would spend here. But Joey O'Brien out of LaSalle College High School in the Philadelphia area, top 50 overall recruit in the country, number 1 recruit in the state of Pennsylvania. We have him as a number 7 athlete. Tyler, I'll let you describe kind of where he is from a positional standpoint, but a big reminder here, LaSalle College High School is where Abdul Carter once shined, and things worked out really well during his 3-year stay in State College.
Some schools have talked to O'Brien about wide receivers. Some schools have talked about safety. With Penn State, it's been a safety-centric conversation, and O'Brien's been very receptive to that. You could very easily, and I will make the case right now, that he's the top overall target on Penn State's 2026 board. He's an elite in-state prospect. His athleticism is off the charts. As a safety, his cover ability, with his length and his size, the possibilities for him are just endless, it feels like, from a developmental standpoint. There is so much for a college coaching staff to work with, especially a coach like Anthony Poindexter, who has a track record of getting safeties with a bigger build to the NFL. That was something we talked about a lot last cycle when Penn State was pursuing Jadon Blair, who landed at Notre Dame. Joey O'Brien is built very similarly to Jadon Blair. I think he's a little bit more athletic than Blair, but the builds are very similar, and that's the kind of safety Poindexter has shown he could have a lot of success with. So when it comes to that most wanted group on Penn State's 2026 board, Joey O'Brien, I believe, is right at the center of the conversation. And I believe it's one that'll go through official visits. Based on what I've been hearing, I think it has the potential to make it through the summer in that regard. And Penn State will get a visit, I would expect. I think Notre Dame is in a spot to get a visit. Clemson's in a spot to get a visit. So it's a highly competitive recruitment, but one Penn State's going to fight to the end, and they're going to have a major say in the way things go.
Well, as things stand right now, halfway through February, Penn State with 9 commitments in the 2026 class. It is the number 4 ranked class nationally, and they have done really well so far building that foundation with in-state pickups. And Joey O'Brien, of course, topping that list moving forward. Fun conversation. We had a little bit of breaking news. We readjusted our show here, and I'm happy to have you on with us, Tyler Calvaruso. We'll talk to you next week when things pop up in the recruiting world. We'll continue to monitor things. I know we have some things to discuss with this Penn State transfer class, the 6 guys who came to campus in January. We'll save that for the next episode you're on. For now, wishing you well during the weekend, and thanks for hopping on and breaking things down for our listeners and viewers.
Thanks, man. Great time as always.
All right, check out Tyler's content over at Lions247.com. He already, as we discussed, broke things down with Messiah Minkins. That's over at the site. He also heard from Kaman Spell, the 2027 commit at running back. That review is over at our site as well. I'm going to have a rundown of the top running back performances under Stan Drayton's watch during his college coaching career. So a little bit of background intel on Penn State's new staff edition, and a lot more coming your way. Ultimately, when Stan Drayton is introduced by the Nittany Lions, we'll be there in the front row, getting the coverage, getting to ask a question, hopefully, and getting to learn more about the Nittany Lions' new running backs coach. For now, I'm Tyler Donahue, stepping aside on behalf of Tyler Calvaruso and the rest of our team. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.